Hello everybody and welcome to the Back to the Future Q&A session here at the University of Southern California. We have the distinct honor to have the two Bobs, director-writer Robert Zemeckis and producer-writer Bob Gale. They're here to answer questions about the making of Back to the Future. And having just screened the film, I am sure there's going to be plenty of questions. My name is Laurent Bouzereau, and I am producing the Back to the Future DVD in collaboration with Universal Studios Home Video. I will be moderating today's event. I will be also repeating each of the questions so that the audience, of course, can hear it. And all of you at home watching this DVD and listening to this audio commentary can also hear what the questions were. So here we go. Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale. Well, let's get started, Bob and Bob. Can you tell us a little bit about where you were at in your career at the time that you started working on Back to the Future? And Bob Zemeckis, tell us about your career at the time.
Well, where we were when we wrote the screenplay was different from when we made the movie. When we wrote the screenplay, we had just finished Used Cars, and we couldn't get a movie made. We couldn't get a movie made anywhere, and it was like, I think, a three, maybe 4-year dry spell. And we wrote Back to the Future during that time, and then I went off and made Romancing the Stone, and then we were able to get Back to the Future made after that movie, thankfully was a hit, because I've got in my archives, I've got a rejection letter from every single studio.
Sometimes more than one from the same
and
studio.
Sometimes we've sent it back twice, rejecting Back to the Future, as a idea for a movie.
Bob Gale, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you guys write together, how you came up with the actual idea for Back to the Future, and maybe begin with your initial fascination with time travel?
We'd always wanted to do a time travel movie. Actually, we were fascinated by the fact that people always predict the future wrong, and we thought it'd be interesting to make a movie that took place in a future as seen by the 1939 World's Fair that had everything wrong in the future. So that was the idea of doing a time travel movie. Kind of came out of that. But there was really no movie there. After Used Cars came out, I went back to visit my parents in St. Louis, Missouri, and I found my father's high school yearbook, and I discovered that my father had been the president of his graduating class, something that I didn't know. And I started thinking about the president of my graduating class, who was somebody I would have had nothing to do with. I was head of the student committee to abolish student government. So I thought, gee, if I had gone to high school with my dad, would I have been friends with him? And that was the spark of the idea. So when I came back to California, I told that little story to Bob, and he kind of jumped up and said, yeah, and wouldn't it be interesting if your mom, who said that she never ever kissed a boy on a date or anything, turned out to be like the school slut? So we started cooking on this, and that was how the concept got going. And of course, there was only one way to have a kid go to high school with his parents, and that was from our point of view, to do it in a time machine, because we'd seen plenty of movies and plenty of stories where somebody, Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, he gets hit on the head and he's suddenly back in the past, and we never bought that. So we decided that if somebody was going to go back in time, it had to be with a time machine. So that's how the creative juices got flowing.
Obviously, the part in the past in the movie takes place in 1955. The Academy Award for Best Picture that year went to a movie called Marty. Is it just a coincidence, or was it a conscious decision to call Michael J. Fox's character in the movie Marty?
I think that was a coincidence, wasn't it? I don't remember us thinking about that.
No, we never thought about that. That was
No,
the fact that Marty, It never even occurred to me until you just mentioned it right now.
Right. Sometimes we name characters that are inside jokes. Other times, I think, in the case of Marty, I think it was just a name that, you know, sometimes we just name characters that have like a good sound to them, that they roll off your tongue kind of easily. And then other times we, you know, name them after people.
Like Biff Tannen, Ned Tannen was the president of Universal. And when we were making I Want to Hold Your Hand, one meeting that we had, he got irate with us in his office and threw the script on the floor, accused us of wanting to make an anti-Semitic movie, even though I'm Jewish. And so in honor of good old Ned, Biff got his last name.
How much research did you find yourself doing on the 1955 time period to make sure that everything was accurate?
We did quite a bit of research. You know, that seemed to be the process of coming up with ideas, was to just go and immerse yourselves in, you know, we would immerse ourselves in, you know, we'd go to the library and read the newspapers of the time, and, you know, those great Time Life series and photograph books of the time. And you have to sort of be a history buff to enjoy doing something like this. And by doing that, I mean, it wasn't like when we came up with specific scenes, we would research specifically if we could do a certain thing. But most of it was just, you know, sort of getting a flavor for the time. And then, of course, once the production gets going, then it gets to be really fun, because then everything starts to get real, and you have the whole teams of researchers in the art department, and they start coming up with ideas, and then you can just sort of riff on what they bring you.
It wasn't a foregone conclusion automatically that 1955 was the year. In fact, when we wrote the script in 1980, it was also 1955 then, and as the years went by, because it was 4 years later that we actually got the movie made, we gave Marty an older brother and an older sister, so that you'd understand the age of his parents, that they would be in high school in 1955. But 1955 was important because we wanted Marty to invent rock and roll. That was one of the ideas that we had real early on. So if it was any later than 1955, that couldn't have worked.
Right. We knew it had to be after rock and roll. It wouldn't have worked if it was 1950 or 1949.
When you were writing the script, did you have any specific actors in mind?
No, I don't think, you know, Bob and I actually, you know, entertain ourselves by, you know, saying, oh, wouldn't so-and-so be funny to do this? But I found over the years, we do that on specific lines of dialogue. You know, we'll sit there and say, you know, Nicholson would, you know, he would really be able to do this line great. So for me, anyway, they become these kind of shadow characters, and I never really see anyone specifically when we're writing. I don't know, do you?
No, sometimes in terms of trying to conceive of how a character would deliver dialogue, we would imagine in our heads like Jack Nicholson or Jimmy Cagney or somebody who has a very distinctive way of speaking, and that's just sort of a guideline to put somebody's voice in our head that allows us to give the dialogue a certain style. Sometimes it's based on somebody that we actually know, just to give the character a style of talking. In Back to the Future, since most of the characters were young people, and there aren't any big stars that are going to be young people, we never thought of that at all.
Could you talk a little more specifically about your collaboration and how you actually write together?
Yeah, we write together. We just put ourselves in the office together, and we write together. I think that the way I sort of describe it is that we basically just, you know, springboard ideas back and forth and act scenes out together, and then if we come up with something good, you know, Bob writes it down, writes it in longhand. We first started outlining it with index cards, and a lot of times we'll think of a scene and we don't know where it goes. For example, one of the first scenes in this movie was Marty invents rock and roll. So we write that down on a card and we pin it up on the wall, and you say to yourself, okay, if Marty's going to invent rock and roll, we have to establish the fact that he can play rock and roll. So that automatically tells you there has to be a scene at the beginning of the movie that has him turn out to be his audition, so that you could see that he knows how to play it.
So one scene then becomes two scenes. And every time we come up with an idea, he's going to invent the skateboard. So we have a card that says skateboard chase, and that means we have to see him on a skateboard somewhere in the beginning of the movie. So again, one scene then becomes two scenes. And pretty soon we have a bunch of cards up on the board, and a lot of times there'll be a lot of space in between them, and we'll say, all right, how do we get from this scene over here to that scene over there? And we'll start kind of focusing on what would have to happen. We always use push pins on those cards because we're always moving them around, because sometimes we'll say, we can't have that scene here. It's got to come two scenes later. And eventually we have a full outline, and then we start really talking about each scene and the dialogue and the physical action that takes place.
It might be noteworthy. I remember to say a few things about my recollection about writing the screenplay, which was it took years. It took us years. I mean, I remember us. I think it took us at least 3 years to write this. Does that make sense? Is that right?
No.
Well, how come maybe it felt like 3 years?
Well, from when we finally made the movie, it was. But when
maybe a year.
We started writing in I think it was around September of 1980 after Used Cars came out, and the first draft has a February '81 date on it, and then we spent 2 months doing a rewrite on that. And that was the draft that we took everywhere in town, and everybody passed on it.
And I remember one of the things that we suffered over, one of the big breakthroughs was we didn't know how to get Marty out of the Oedipal situation with his mother. I remember that. I think that took us months and months to figure that one out. And we didn't know how we knew we had this great story that got us to this place, and then we didn't know what to do. We just had no, and I remember we were stuck on the fact that we felt that it was that the Marty character had to do something. We couldn't figure out what he could possibly do, and then the big breakthrough came when we decided that and my favorite line that we wrote in the entire movie is when she says, "It's like I'm kissing my brother," and that made it like. That just solved that whole problem. We were able to actually make that story work. We struggled over that for a really long time. And I think the other big breakthrough, which made the movie just, charged the screenplay, was when we came up with the idea of making the time machine mobile. Yeah. Because, our first drafts or the time machine was this machine that was this big, It
was a chamber.
A chamber.
It was in Doc's Doc's lab, and if he had to go anywhere, he had to put it in the back of a pickup truck. And in fact, in that early draft, the nuclear-powered thing required them to drive it out onto a nuclear test site in New Mexico. And that was the climax of the movie, and it stayed that way until budget problems made it impossible for us to do that.
The thing with the nuclear test site, we actually went into production expecting to design that, and the idea was in the original, in the very early, all the early drafts of the screenplay, the only place they were able to, get the enough energy was they had to bring the time machine to the Nevada nuclear test site in the 50s, where they set up all those little villages and towns to blow up with nuclear bombs, and Marty and the Doc sneak onto that, and the big countdown was to the nuclear blast. Marty, when Marty went back in time, he arrived at Ground Zero, and there was a bunch of tourists there, in the taking his picture and stuff. But anyway, we were told that we had to cut $2 million out of the budget, or they weren't going to make the movie, and that's one of the things where there's method to the madness, because the realization that we weren't going to be able to go and move the company to Nevada or to Arizona or someplace and shoot. We were going to have to do the whole thing at the studio to do it on for the price. But it turned out that it became a much better scene. It became a much better scene because there was no way to involve the Doc, actually, if I remember right.
Yeah, Doc it was just over the walkie-talkies where Doc was just there on the side of a mountain watching all this stuff. And of course, just tying everything into the town and keeping it all local in the town just made it all absolutely better. And it was one of those things where necessity becomes the mother of invention, because when we were told, okay, you got to cut that scene out, Bob and I spent a weekend walking around the back lot at Universal trying to figure out, well, this is the only environment that we have that isn't going to cost us any money, that we can completely control exactly what are we going to do. And we managed to cook up the clock tower sequence.
One of the most memorable characters in the movie is, of course, Doc Brown. I was just wondering if you had any kind of inspirations or any kind of influences that helped you create that particular character.
Well, Christopher Lloyd always said that he made the character of Doc Brown a combination of Albert Einstein and the conductor Leopold Stokowski. So all those big broad gestures that he's always doing, Chris is a big classical music aficionado, so that's what he had in his mind, a big shock of hair like Stokowski. If you don't remember who Stokowski is, just watch the beginning of Fantasia. That's Leopold Stokowski.
Well, and you know, in the early drafts of the screenplay, the reason we always wrote him as Professor Brown, and that had a good ring to it. You know, he was a professor. We never wrote him as a doc. And Sid Sheinberg, the head of the studio, insisted that we change his title from professor because he thought it just sounded too corny. There's those famous Sid Sheinberg stories, which we can tell you. He had 3 notes when Steven gave him the screenplay to read. One was that we couldn't call the doc professor. And we didn't have, and the second one was in the original drafts of the screenplay, he had a chimp as a mascot instead of the dog. And Sid said, you have to get rid of that chimp because no one's going to go see a movie with a chimp in it.
We actually had this meeting with him. It's hysterical. He said, I've done the research. No movie with a chimpanzee in it has ever made a profit. And I said, well, and in the 80s, there were these 2 Clint Eastwood movies, Every Which Way But Loose and Any Which Way You Can. And I said, what about those movies, Sid? And he said, that was an orangutan in those movies.
And the third one was he hated the title, but that we stuck to our guns on that one.
There was a 4th one.
Which one was that?
Which was that originally Marty's mother's name was not Lorraine. It was Meg. Remember that?
That's right. That's right.
He didn't like that name, so he said, name her Lorraine. Coincidentally, his wife's name is Lorraine.
So we knew how to pick our battles because you know, I think Sid's comment was nobody's going to go see a movie with the word future in the title, and you know, so we decided that that was the one we would give up the others. We changed the chimp to a dog and the names, but we stuck to Back to the Future, and then afterwards we were having a meeting, a celebratory meeting in Sid's office after the movie was a giant success, and we said, well, you see, Sid, you know, people went to the movie. And he says, yes, but I'll never know if I was right or not, will I? And I guess not.
Bob Gale, can you actually reveal what the alternate title was?
Well, the alternate title, and this got hot and heavy during the actual production and post-production of the movie because we'd given Sid what he wanted on these other issues, and he kept on this, and he decided that the hit title for the movie should be Spaceman from Pluto. And that's because of the comic book that the kid has in the barn, Space Zombies from Pluto. And Sid actually sent us a memo where he outlined certain changes that should be made in the movie to reflect this new title, Spaceman from Pluto. And one of them was that instead of Marty saying, I'm Darth Vader from the planet Vulcan, he should say, I'm from the planet Pluto. There were 1 or 2 other things like that. And Bob and I got this memo, and we were really scared and worried because he meant it. I mean, you got to be careful the kind of fights that you pick with the head of the company. He wasn't just the head of the studio; he was the head of the company. And every single person at Universal thought Back to the Future was a great title, except for Sid. So we went to Steven with this memo, because Steven had been copied on it, and we said, Steven, what are we going to do? He really means it. He really wants to change his title. And Steven, in this one solution to the problem, I think, earned all the money that he made off of all these movies. He wrote a memo back to Sheinberg, and he said, Dear Sid, thank you so much for your most humorous memo. We really all got a big laugh out of it. And Steven knew that Sid was too proud to admit that he meant it seriously, and that was the end of it. That was the end of it.
Going back to the time machine itself, what convinced you to choose the DeLorean?
The joke in the barn, because that's what my memory is like. We backed it into that joke because we thought, well, a car from the, what would really look like a spaceship landing in the barn in the 50s. We said, hey, a DeLorean's got these gull-wing doors. That'll really look like a futuristic, machine from outer space. And that was basically it.
And it was stainless steel.
And then we had no idea there would be all this, cocaine controversy, and it would be such an infamous car when we wrote the joke.
We actually got a fan letter from John DeLorean after the movie came out. And he just sent us this glowing letter, how much he enjoyed the movie and thanked us for keeping his dream alive, and said that any of the people that worked on the car in the movie could have a job on his design team.
Can you explain why you don't really go into the backstory of the relationship between Doc Brown and Marty?
We never really thought about it. We thought that, the familiarity of him, being able to just walk into his lab, and actually, you know what? We always saw it as we kind of always saw it as the way Leave It to Beaver was with
Gus the
fireman. It's like the result. Beaver always had the fireman that he could go to as basically he was like his therapist, and he went there and it would tell him about all the problems he was having with his with his family. And we always sort of said, let's have a relationship between Marty and the Doc, that Marty would be this kid who was attracted to this crackpot scientist who was in this building inventions in this garage down the street. But we just felt that to build a whole backstory would take too long, so we just sort of did it with trying to blast through it with the fact that obviously they know each other because it's so familiar.
When I was a kid, people that moved next door to us, the guy was a retired professional photographer. Not retired, he was just much older, and he had all this great darkroom equipment. And I was 8 years old, and I'd never seen any of this kind of stuff before. So this guy was like a magician to me, and me and my brothers would go over there and watch him develop film, and we developed a relationship with him. And he just was somebody that was kind of in my head as a type of thing. Plus, in a smaller town, if everybody tells you that there's a guy who's dangerous, who's a crackpot, well, every kid's going to want to find out who that guy is and get to know him.
And every single movie story can be found in episodes of Leave It to Beaver. So for all you screenwriters out there, just if you're struggling with a problem in your screenplay, watch Leave It to Beaver. You'll find the way to fix the script in that series.
As you took the script around town and kept getting rejection, did you at any point go back to the drawing boards and revise the script at all?
What happened was that Spielberg wanted to do it right after Used Cars. He's the only guy who got it. But we had made 2 movies that he executive produced that flopped.
Plus 1941, which
we took the blame. Yeah, because that was his only money losing movie up to that point, was the one that we wrote. So I said to Steven, if we make this movie and it doesn't work, he said, we'll probably never be able to work again. And he said, you're right. And so we just put it on the shelf. We actually even had one meeting on the movie with a studio executive who I won't name, who was so excited about it. And we sat down in his office and he went, yeah. And we're telling him what we want to do. And we thought, and we were on a real, it was a really, really good meeting. And then he said, and so what's Steven's involvement? And we said, well, nothing. He said, oh. And the meeting was over. And we knew that was it. So then after Romancing the Stone, now everybody wanted to make it. And Bob and I felt that the only upstanding thing to do is to bring it to the only guy who had original faith in it, not based on our box office track record. So we brought it back to Steven. And then he had become famous with E.T. and everything. And so it was like this perfect fit, because he was becoming this
the master of fantasy,
brand
family
name,
entertainment. And that was one of the big objections to the script, is everybody told us that it was too sweet, it was too nice, Everybody was looking for R-rated raunchy comedies, and this is just...
Except Disney, who said it was too dirty. Remember that? They said because of the thing with his mother, they said, oh, no. That was before the Eisner-Katzenberg days. That was the old Disney, and they said, no, we can't make this. That's right. So, you know, it wasn't raunchy enough for most studios and too dirty for Disney, so we were stuck.
How did you go about coming up with the mechanics of the time travel?
Well, the mechanics of time travel, the fact that everybody says, why 88 miles an hour? What's so special about that? That's easy to remember. That's all. There's no special significance to that. The whole idea of what the time machine should look like, we decided way early on that if there was going to be a working time machine, one of the problems that we had to solve writing-wise is where did it come from? And first we said, well, could come from the government. The government could be working on it. And we thought about that. We said, no, if the government built it, it wouldn't work. Then we thought, well, some major corporation could be working on it. And then we said, no, we don't like the idea that some major corporation is working on time travel. That opens up a big can of worms that we didn't want to deal with. We thought that the American myth is that there's a guy who, in his garage, invented the automobile engine that gets 200 miles to the gallon. He invented the reusable match that the match companies won't let us have because it'll put them out of business. The car companies won't let us have the engine. That's the guy that would invent time travel, and he would look like Dr. Emmett Brown. And so one of the things that we kept stressing to our art department and the people that we hired to help design the DeLorean was that it really needed to look dangerous and look like it was built in somebody's garage. It couldn't have a real Star Trek machined look, because a guy that's trying to invent stuff in his garage would just, you know, stick something on the side of his car temporarily to see if it worked, and then he'd forget that it was temporary, and he'd put some other coil on there, and pretty soon you'd have this big mishmash. So we wanted it to look dangerous. At the same time, because it was nuclear, we did do a little homework on nuclear reactors, and those big vents that are on the back, those are supposed to be cooling towers, the same that you have at a nuclear power plant. And so after the plutonium fires off, you have all this big steam come out of there because that's what would happen in a nuclear reaction. So we did actually try to have some sense of logic that we could stick to and make sense out of it that was a guide.
But as far as the actual nuts and bolts of time travel itself, that's one of the things that Bob and I are like really proud of. We were absolutely fanatics about dealing with what the real rules of time travel would be, and we basically based our time travel theories on The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, and simply we stuck to that one, which is that you travel through time, you don't travel through space, and most of your time travel stories and movies make that fatal mistake. Is all of a sudden, you know, you're in California and you travel back to ancient Rome. You know, how did you get to Rome? You know, if you're in this latitude and longitude. And in the H.G. Wells stories, the time machine never moved in space, except at the very end when he, you know, drags it a few feet.
Right.
So that is exactly what Bob and I did, and how our time machine worked. And you know, we were very careful. As a matter of fact, I was just thinking about it as I was watching the end of the movie just now. I remembered that we had to, the whole reason why we had the car not be able to start after we got back at the end of the movie to the future was so that we didn't have to deal with the duplication of 2 DeLoreans, and we only had to deal with him being, you know, duplicated once in that one paradox. We cleaned that up real quick, and of course, if you talk to all the time travel scientists and the people who study this stuff, they think that, you know, that we'll probably be able to figure out how to travel into the future. Traveling to the past will be much more difficult because of the paradoxes involved. You know.
Eric Stoltz was in the movie prior to Michael J. Fox. Can you tell us why you had to recast the role of Marty?
The lesson that I learned was you just have to stick to your convictions at all costs, no matter what. And what happened to me is it was completely my fault, and I miscast Eric Stoltz. I didn't know it at the time. I felt that I was going to be able to make it work. I had always envisioned like Michael in the part, but he was doing this TV series, and conventional wisdom was that you can't possibly do, you can't possibly do a feature film with an actor who's in a TV series. It's impossible. And one of the other mandates that was given by Mr. Scheinberg is that if I didn't have the movie for Memorial Day, I'm not making it. So I was stuck, and I had to cast somebody, and Eric was the best that I had available. And then but then when I shot the first couple of weeks of the movie, he just wasn't understanding, or I wasn't able to communicate the type of humor that I was seeing in the movie. The other reason that Steven deserves all the money that he made off of this movie was the fact that, when I went to Steven and I said, I got to recast, Eric, he said,
You're right.
You're right. And then he went to Sid and got him to agree to, and then not only got him to agree to let me recast him, and of course the painful part was, everything that we went, poor Eric had to go through, but then also to agree to allow us to make the movie basically working. We made this entire movie at night. We made this a movie from 6 at night till 6 in the morning because Michael was working on the TV show during the day. Then he'd drive to the studio, and we just stayed on nights. Even when it was the most.
It was splits, most of it.
It was splits, most of it, but it was pretty insane because we were on sound stages shooting, lighting the sound stages for daylight at 2 in the morning. So it was pretty crazy. It was pretty insane the way we did it. And then and we didn't make the Memorial Day date, but we did make the 4th of July.
The irony of it all is that because we put Eric Stoltz in the movie is the reason that we got Michael J. Fox in the movie. We approached Gary Goldberg, who was a producer of Family Ties. That was the first phone call we made because we wanted Michael in the movie. And he said, he read the script. He said, this is perfect for Michael. He said, I cannot let him read this script because when he reads this and I tell him that he can't do it, then I'm not going to let him out of the TV show to do it. He'll hate me for the rest of his life. And Meredith Baxter Birney, who played his mother on that show, was pregnant at the time, and Michael was really carrying the show. So that just right away put him out of it. So we kept pushing our start date back while we kept trying to find the perfect Marty McFly. So by the time we made the realization that we had to make a change, it was now at the beginning of January 1985. Meredith Baxter Birney had already had her baby, so we went back to Gary Goldberg and said, we are up against it, Gary. There is only one guy that can play this part. And he said, okay, I'll let Michael read it if he wants to do it. It's fine with me as long as you guys understand that Family Ties is always in first position, and that if there's a conflict between us and you, we win. Family Ties wins. So that was the rules. And of course, when Michael read the script, he flipped for it. And he said, try and stop me from being in this movie.
One of the amazing things about the movie is, of course, the performances. And I was just wondering how much of those performances are in the script and how much of the performances was improvisation by the actors.
I don't like to watch actors improv in movies. I hate watching actors trying to think up lines while they're acting. But if they can take the essence of what it is that we wrote and improve it, or make it theirs, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. And the whole point is that the screenplay is supposed to be this blueprint for the movie. I've always said that good directing is good casting and good writing. And you cast the right actor and you've got a good script, your directing looks great.
The mannerisms that Crispin Glover has, that's what he brought. He came in to read, and he started doing all that stuff with his hands, and we just looked at each other and said, this guy was probably born to play George McFly.
Right, and my job as the director in that case was the endless, throwing the net over Crispin, because You know, he was completely off. I would say he was completely off about 50% of the time in his interpretation of the character, meaning he had bizarre ideas of what the character's wardrobe should look like and what his hair should look like. And
probably the single hardest thing that we had to do in the movie was at the very end when he comes in as the new George McFly, and he looks like a normal middle-class American citizen. That was pulling teeth to get him to do that.
Crispin thought that when George shows up at the end of the movie, he should be wearing, you know, gray baggy pants and a sleeveless tank top T-shirt, like some guy in the barrio. And I swear to God, he absolutely he did those scenes totally under protest.
That was the second time we filmed them. We filmed them once and they weren't right. And he actually went around dressed the way Bob just described on the set, trying to solicit the crew to say, don't you think this is what George should look like? And nobody on the crew agreed with him.
There's a scene in the cafeteria when he's writing his stories, and if you look on the, you know, and if you look real close at his performance, he's like, his face is all red and his eyes are puffy and his eyes are all bloodshot, because Crispin insisted that his hair should be sticking straight up. And you know, and the day before, because, you know, we got this thing with Michael, we had shot Michael's side of the scene, you know, with his hair down. I said, well, you know, it's like, it didn't make any sense, Crispin. It's not gonna, not only does this, I don't understand this. He says, well, when I write, I think my hair should be straight up. And I said, but I don't get that. And he says, you don't get that? I said, no. And he couldn't explain it.
And he said, when Bob said it's not going to match with what we shot yesterday, he said, well, Brando never matched.
He said, Brando never matched. So that was his answer to that.
Wasn't it difficult for Michael J. Fox to be shooting his television series and shoot the movie at the same time? How did he manage? How could he even function doing that?
Well, he was young, and he was young in those days, and
we started shooting with Michael around the first or second week of January 1985, and I think his show ended shooting in about the second or third week of March, and then we wrapped photography in the third week in April.
And that stuff like, and then we also had the problem of we had to finish everything in the square. That was the 1950s, because we had to turn it around into the 1980s. So we actually shot the daytime scenes in the on the back lot on the weekends. So Michael didn't even get to sleep on the weekends, because the only time we could get him for a full day of light was on Saturday and Sunday, at great expense to management, because everybody's working platinum time on Sunday to shoot. And you know, so he didn't sleep hardly at all during that whole, I guess, 10, 12-week period that we were making the movie.
How did you go about selecting Christopher Lloyd to play the character of Doc Brown?
Neil Canton had worked with Christopher Lloyd on Buckaroo Banzai, and I think, as I remember, the guy that we first wanted to have play Doc Brown was John Lithgow, who also was a veteran of that movie. And he wasn't available, and Neil just said, you guys got to meet Christopher Lloyd. You got to meet him. And Chris came in and...
didn't say a word. Just sat in the office.
But he looked at us with those eyes, and we said, shit, that's Dr. Emmett Brown.
As a matter of fact, Chris never said a word. I never had a conversation with him the entire movie. It took, Chris is like so shy that you know, I just say, all right, Chris, you know, we're gonna hang you, put you in a harness. You're gonna go up on the thing. We're gonna do, you know, camera's gonna be here. You're gonna like hang from the clock, and there'll be this lightning and wind, and he would go, okay. And that's how Chris and I. It took this entire movie for Chris to warm up to me enough to actually, like, you know, like for us to have conversations in the previous movie and the following movies. But yeah, Chris is, you know, he'd just say, okay.
And the amazing thing about him is that he would be different every time. Every take he'd do something a little different. You never exactly knew what it would be, but it was always right. he created such a latitude with his character that we always had an embarrassment of riches in the editing room, because he'd just do some crazy thing with his eyes on one line in one take, and then he'd do something else in another take, and it was always a tough decision to try to say which of these kind of moments are we going to use. He was always wonderful, and it was good for the other actors. It was especially good for Michael J. Fox, because Chris kept surprising him, and so he was able to react a little bit differently in each scene, in each take, and that kept his performance fresh, and it kept him on his toes when he might have preferred to have gone into his trailer to take a nap.
Yeah, and you got to love Chris, because you talk about, somebody asked a question earlier about what happens, like how does a performance get designed, and like for example, I think Chris is like 6'4",
6'2", yeah,
6'2", and well, Michael's not that tall, and you got to love Chris, because Chris does the whole movie. He does the whole movie hunched over, so I could keep them both in frame. Chris, he did this whole performance like this, Marty, and and it was like he did that for me, because otherwise, I couldn't keep, I couldn't keep these guys in frame, and he just kept himself in frame for me, and and kind of like made the character live, live that way. And the other thing I remember too is, Chris absolutely would never let you know what he was going to do until the camera was rolling. And I mean, he would only ever do a rehearsal or a camera blocking literally at quarter speed. And he would never, and he would stumble through his lines, and he would have the script pages with him. And it was like, and so then when we would say roll, he was nowhere where the camera operator could find him in frame. So basically, I just started rolling the camera all the time, knowing that, and telling everybody that, until
we don't know what's going to happen.
We don't know what's going to happen,
but it'll be good.
But this is the only way we're going to get a full speed rehearsal is to roll film through the camera. It was like kind of a thing that Chris had about that.
Did you always have a sequel in mind? Because, of course, at the end of Back to the Future, Doc Brown comes back in the car.
No, I say, I've said in this other documentary, if we were planning for a sequel, I never would have put the girl in the car. I mean, no, we didn't. We had.
The ending was a joke.
It was a joke.
It's just a joke. Something's got to be done about your kids. We had no idea whether this movie would make a dime. We would have been happy if it just barely broke even, because our other movies lost money. We didn't know that anybody would have the slightest interest in seeing this picture. So that was, the characters go riding off into the sunset. That's the end of the movie.
What were you looking for when you were casting the role of Biff?
Interestingly, the character, there's a character in the gang with a crew cut who's credited as Skinhead. His name's J.J. Cohn. And he was somebody that we were very seriously considering to play Biff. He came in and he just knocked us out. But he didn't have the physical presence that playing against Eric Stoltz, you would have never believed that he could push Eric Stoltz around. So if Michael J. Fox had been in the movie at that time, J.J. Cohn might have ended up being Biff, because he would have been 4 or 5 inches taller than him. We wanted somebody that had a real physical presence, and Tom Wilson is a big guy, absolutely nothing like the character of Biff. Just the sweetest, most gentle guy in the world. And he says that when he was a kid, he got picked on, and that's where he drew his inspiration for what he did.
Can you make comments about Leah Thompson and working with her on the film?
Yeah, because Leah just was so great and wonderful and sweet, and she did everything she was told, and she never gave us any problems. I mean, it was just a dream. And she would just work and do it perfect every take, and just, I mean, she was just absolutely fantastic. I mean, I can't, just great.
We can't tell any great Leah Thompson stories,
there are none,
because
she was just
she was his director's dream,
always
and a
there,
producer's dream.
yeah.
Always on time, always knew her lines, always did it right. Actually, there's something we should talk about, which is that one of the important decisions that we made in the movie was using young actors to play themselves old. At the time, there were executives that thought maybe we should find actors that looked like them to play them older. And we went through quite a lot of makeup tests to prove that it could be done this way. Because normally, certainly at that time, this wasn't done. You didn't take a 18-year-old or 22-year-old actor and put makeup on them and make them look like they were 47. And so we did quite a lot of extensive makeup tests with Ken Chase. We hired, he'd done all the prosthetic makeup on Roots. And Ken always told us that it would have been a lot easier for him if he were making these 18-year-olds to look like they were 75 instead of 45, because then he could have put full makeup on all over their face. But he had to create these different appliances so that the actual face of the actor would be there, would be able to move, and everybody didn't look like they had too much Botox. And it's a tribute to all the cast that they were able to create things in their performance that made you buy them at age 47. It wasn't just the makeup; it was their posture and their body language and their wardrobe, of course.
Can you tell us about working with Dean Cundy, your director of photography, and Larry Paul, the production designer on Back to the Future?
Well, I had worked with both Dean and Larry on Romancing the Stone and got along with them great. You know, it was the design of the movie. Basically, I guess the thing we started with was the square, the town square, and we just wanted to make this kind of cynical statement about what it used to look like and what it looks like now, and that was just it was a lot of fun to do and to be able to just take it from there. But
we actually considered shooting that on location. Remember, we scouted Petaluma. Right. We went up to Petaluma, which is where Joe Dante made Explorers, which came out a couple weeks before our movie did in 1985. And it had this great look to it, but when we started realizing all the headaches that we would have trying to change the light fixtures, the street lighting, and every little thing, every business that had to be bought out to change a modern-day town and take it back 30 years, it ended up that it was pointless to do anything except shoot it on the back lot.
In terms of the car, Michael J. Fox talks about how demonic that car was. Do you have any memories about how difficult it was to work with it as a prop?
Oh yeah, it was a terrible car. Oh, it was terrible. I mean, you know, the frame is plastic. It's, you know, I mean...
They had a 4-cylinder Volvo engine in that model DeLorean. Right. So it didn't have any pickup at all.
And, you know, and it was impossible to shoot around, and...
We had to cut one apart because it was too small to get a camera in. So all the scenes that we have inside of the DeLorean where Michael's sitting in there and driving it were process done on the stage, and we actually had to cut the car apart so that we could pull the back wall out and get the camera in there.
Right. Yes, but I mean, all movie cars are like that. I mean, there's just something about it. You know, as soon as you bring a picture car on the set, it just doesn't start, or it runs out of gas. It never fails. It's just one of those curses. I've never had it not happen.
One of the problems that we had a lot was, again, nobody would have ever thought of this one. We'd be shooting outside on the back lot, and at night it got really cold out there. It was wintertime. We're shooting it, and the way that the DeLorean gull-wing doors stayed up was there were these little gas jet things like you used to open up a door, and when we left the door open for a while, the gas would condense in the cold, and the door would just start to drop down in the middle of a take. So finally, what we had to do in between takes, we had the special effects crew out there with portable hair dryers, and they were in there heating up those valves, heating up that gas so that the car door would stay open through an entire take.
ILM did the special visual effects for all 3 movies, and obviously they were in their early days at the time you made the first picture. And I was just wondering if you had any concerns at the time about some of the visual effects that had to be done to the picture.
Well, there was no digital work. No, that's what all, there is no. Everything was there. Everything was optical, and there's only, I think, about 30-some shots in the whole movie. Everyone sees it as a big special effects movie, but there weren't that many shots, and in those days, everything had to be a lock-off, and they had this little, VistaVision camera that could only run like a minute of film, that was real old-fashioned optical stuff from the early days of Star Wars. That's what everything was. The car at the end was a miniature that they made it move just like they did the spaceships in Star Wars on an articulated arm, and he had I guess that was a motion control camera they had up at ILM with a green screen and a blue screen, and just all the old optical, everything, old optical work.
And we never saw a decent optical until about a week before the picture had to be turned over to negative cutting.
Right.
We were terrified because this was the first time we'd ever worked with ILM, and we would get these comps down and they would be terrible. And Bob would have these frantic conversations with Ken Ralston about why this didn't look right and why this didn't look right, and would it even be possible to get it in time? And ILM did.
There's still one shot that still doesn't work, and that Ken just couldn't get the one where his hand, he sees his eye through his hand. But you know what? That's the imperfection that we put in there we didn't want to insult Allah, so. It's like, so it's like it's a movie, so it's perfect enough,
ILM worked on all three movies, but obviously when Back to the Future was made, they were in their earlier days. And I'm just wondering if you had any concerns about some of the work that had to be done in the movie in terms of visual effects.
There's shots of Chris on the clock tower where you actually can see the cable on his harness, which would be an insult if I paid $9 to go see Spider-Man and I actually saw a cable in the shot. There's no excuse for that now. But in those days, there was no way to remove it. And that was the best play piece of performance. God, this movie would be so easy to make now. I mean, can you imagine how I would have done the town square? I would have just painted it in. I would have had huge buildings, and it would have been like, and then when I went back to the 80s, it would have been so completely different. I wouldn't have had to do it all physically. So I could have made it better if I had digital technology. Movies have always been this technical thing, and it all just ultimately comes back to the script and the imagination of the filmmaker, and the digital stuff is just the tool,
Being a director and a screenwriter, was there a particular scene that you were excited about going in and directing? And did that scene come out exactly the way you wanted it, the way you had imagined it?
I just couldn't believe how lucky I was on the day we shot Michael walking into the town square the first time, because I had those great cumulus clouds in the sky. See, now if I was doing the movie today, I just would have painted all those in. The sky would have looked perfect, but I was like, I can't believe how lucky we were to have that sky.
That was
like, so you have those, or, there's millions of times in this movie where the actor will do something that you never imagined, and you go, wow, I never thought I'd ever see an actor do a reading like that, or hear that. And those are the gems. But as far as my work, it's always just compromise. It's always less than I ever imagined it. I always have to go in and say, well, we'll piece this together. We'll figure out a way to make it work somehow. It could have, if we had another day, it could have really been great. That's how I come away from everything.
Of course, in this movie, we did have the unusual circumstance of actually getting to redo a couple of those scenes, and we did make them a little bit better.
Make them a little better. But they were also angst-ridden, too, because, once you go back, you feel like you're compelled to make it better. That's why anytime you reshoot, it's always a pain, because you're going, oh, no, I got to make it better now. And there's nothing worse than reshooting.
Michael J. Fox would go crazy because we'd have these conversations, say, well, we did this scene before. And he'd go, damn it, I never did this scene before.
That's right. And sometimes, and some scenes I just shot it. Some scenes I shot it, exactly the way I shot it with Eric. Completely camera in the same place. And then other times I was able to go back and say, you know what, we can improve this by, you know, doing this. And the best thing is you get to, the advantage of going back and redoing stuff sometimes is that you know what you don't need. Well, let's not waste our time doing that, you know, that wide angle. We're never going to use it. So that was helpful.
Can you comment on the editing of the film? Was it as frantic as the shooting in terms of schedule? And are there any deleted scenes?
I guess I was coming into the editing room about 2 hours before the call. So I'd go and I'd edit, and then because we were shooting nights, I'd go and I'd edit, and then I'd go see dailies, and then I'd go start to work. And I would just, you know, we had, I think the editing rooms were trailers near the back lot, weren't they? So it was pretty, so I could just, you know, toward the end, I was just getting in a golf cart and zipping over there, and they'd look at a scene, give them my notes, and we had to put 2 editors on because we had to have this accelerated, you know, release, because when did we wrap?
We wrapped, I think it was like April 20th.
And the movie came out on the 4th of July?
July 3rd. So
July 3rd.
it was 9.5 weeks from when we wrapped to when the movie was in the theater. And this movie ruined post-production schedules in Hollywood because nobody thought that this was even possible. And at the point when we changed actors, Universal kind of was resigned to the fact that the movie probably wouldn't come out until the middle of August now. So we were kind of thinking that we'd have a release date in the middle of August. And then we had this dynamite sneak preview. And here comes Mr. Scheinberg again, and he sees the movie with this audience, and they just go completely nuts. And the visual effects weren't finished. The last shot in the movie was in black and white. I mean, it was still pretty rough, but the audience just got it, and got it big time. And he pulled us aside and he said, is it possible, what would we have to do to get this movie out for the 4th of July weekend? And we said, write some checks. And he said, okay, whatever it costs, do it. And we actually had sound crews working 24 hours a day. We had, in the Hitchcock Theater where we were doing the mix, we had a pre-dub crew working the graveyard shift. They'd start working about 8 o'clock at night and go home at 7 in the morning. And then then we'd come in at 8 o'clock in the morning and mix the picture with the tracks that they had pre-dubbed for us the night before. So that was, it was insane.
Bob Gale, can you tell us a little bit more about the sneak previews? Any surprises after the first one?
The first sneak preview, we had 2 sneak previews. The first one was in San Jose, and we didn't invite the studio to that one. One of the advantages of having Steven Spielberg as your executive producer is he can close the door on certain people that you don't want there. We didn't want their feedback yet. We didn't want the studio to see the movie and hear their feedback. We wanted to hear what the audience had to say. And one of the things that the movie had gotten no publicity. Back then, of course, there was no internet. There was no advance word about anything. And here we had a recruited audience, and all they knew was they were seeing a movie that had Michael J. Fox, who they knew from Family Ties, and Christopher Lloyd, who they knew from Taxi. And it was some kind of a comedy, and they didn't even know what it was about. So when they didn't even know it was about time travel. So when the DeLorean comes out of the truck, they didn't know what it was. And I remember when Doc does his time travel experiment with Einstein, and the car and the dog disappears, there was this very nervous thing happen in the audience where people thought that something bad might have happened to that dog. They were real worried about that. And there was this big sigh of relief when the dog comes back and he's okay. And I remember that the point in the movie at that screening where they got it was when Marty sees his father in the cafe. And that scene when Biff and those guys come in and start harassing, hey, McFly, at that point, you really knew that they were totally with it, and they completely went with it. We cut 6 or 7 minutes out of the picture after that screening, and that was the last time that ever happened, that there was this, that people didn't know it was a time travel movie. Once, of course, they knew that it was a time travel movie, and the word started to get out about this kid that meets his parents. A lot of the stuff at the beginning played differently than it did with a completely cold audience. And of course, no one was ever again worried about the dog.
Can you tell us a little bit about Steven Spielberg? What is he like to work with on a day-to-day basis in production and post-production? Was he very hands-on?
You know, with me, Steven's great. Steven's a director, so he doesn't ask you to do insane things. He's always respected my vision as a director. And I can't speak for other directors, but for me, he's never meddled in the process anywhere.
Tell them the story about the score and how Stephen was so concerned about the score. You remember that?
For this movie?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, well, Bob had worked with Alan Silvestri on Romancing the Stone, and Stephen wasn't that enamored of the score of Romancing the Stone, and he made no bones about making that clear, and he thought that we needed somebody that could do a more John Williams kind of a score. And he was always paranoid about what the score was going to be. So in that first preview, we had a mixture of temp music and we'd had the first 2 days of scoring. So we actually had some of the real score cut into the movie. So one of Alan's cues came on during the sneak, and Stephen leans over to Bob and he says, "That's what your score should sound like."
Oh, I remember
Bob
that,
said,
yeah.
"That is the score, Steve."
Yeah, right. I remember that. Right. Right. Stephen, is always trying to do what's right for you in the movie, and you just have to sometimes, you just have to cherry pick his ideas, because sometimes he'll have really good ideas, and sometimes he's not making the movie you're making. So it's like he's just another opinion in the mix.
Bob has a theory. He says if one person says something, that's their opinion. If two people say the same thing, then there are probably millions of people that will agree.
Right.
So if one person said, "Well, I don't like that," and somebody else said, "Well, I like that, I didn't like this," and there's all this difference of opinion about everything, we kind of just shrug our shoulders and say, "Well, let's not worry about that." But if 2 or 3 people kept saying, "I don't know, that thing where Biff does this is really bothers me," then we go back and look at that and say, maybe there's a problem with that.
Did you guys have any concerns? What was the reaction, really, before the movie came out?
We had 2 previews in theaters and 1 on the studio lot. I mean, there was a controversy about that too, because they had just built this Hitchcock theater, and supposedly it was cursed, meaning that any movie that ever played in the Hitchcock, they said, "Is this a movie a comedy? Well, don't ever play it in the Hitchcock theater, because nothing plays in the Hitchcock theater. Everything we ever screened there is." I remember Sid got up and said, "The problem with," after the lights came on.
We turned to him and we said, well, so much for the curse of the Hitchcock theater. And Sid says, "The curse of the Hitchcock theater has been shitty movies."
Right. So he says, and then the other thing too is we developed the original screenplay at Columbia, and Stephen originally developed E.T. at Columbia. So when the lights came on at the first preview that Sid saw the movie, the other thing he said was, "I get the best stuff from Columbia Pictures." There was something like that. So anyway, the previews, I remember that I got incredibly almost paralyzed with fear when I had all these really good previews, because I understood that the movies, both I Want to Hold Your Hand and Used Cars, also had tremendous previews, and it didn't mean anything. It's 2 different worlds. There are so many wonderful movies that are made, and they're great and they work, but nobody wants to go see them. So I was really terrified that they weren't going to be able to open this movie. I just thought, oh my, I just was terrified that the movie might not find its audience. But then I also remember that, and I didn't like the TV spots, and I realized on making this movie that that's an art form that I don't understand, and I should just butt out of the marketing, because there was whoever, I forget who it was now, but whoever cut the TV spot, every single marketing piece of material had that one line of Michael Fox's in there where he said, "Are you telling me my mother's got the hots for me?" And I thought the way you sell this movie is with all my effects and my action. And I didn't, but they saw the movie and they said, "This is what the spot should be." And that one line was in everything, and there was something about that they understood that that's what people would come in. Seeing Michael J. Fox say that was the whole campaign.
For me, the first time that I thought maybe we might have something happening we shot the exterior of the high school stuff down at Whittier High School, and one night we were shooting the dance stuff, and word got out that Michael J. Fox was in this movie, and suddenly we had kids lined up 7 deep, just trying to catch a glimpse of Michael J. Fox, and that never happened to us before in any movie we'd done, and we said, wow, this guy's really a star. We didn't realize how big of a star you can be from being in a hit TV series.
And Michael was unavailable to do any promotion. I remember that because Sid was because Sid was angry about that. So we got the star in this movie. We can't even put him on TV because Michael, that being on top of everything else with his Family Ties, they decided that they were going to go shoot an entire season in Europe. Like Family Ties goes to Europe.
Goes to London, yeah.
And that was the summer. That was the summer that the movie opened. So Michael wasn't even around to enjoy all the insanity of the success of the movie, and B, he wasn't around to promote the movie either. It's like he just kept hearing it on the phone that the movie's, a success.
Do you remember good reviews, bad reviews? Were you concerned about reviews or even paying attention?
You mean of the reviews? No. There were some,
We got a lot of good reviews. We got some people that didn't like it, and that's what makes the world go round. If you start worrying about that, you can really make yourself insane.
Yeah, I remember Steve Martin once. I saw him do an interview once where he said, that the critics who give my movies good reviews are like insightful, wonderful, genius people, and those who give my movies bad reviews are worthless scum.
At what point did you guys realize that not only did you have a hit, but you had a mega hit? And how did it change your life and career?
Second weekend, the box office gross was higher than it was in the opening weekend.
Yeah, you don't see that anymore.
When the movie was released, I think we were only in 11 or 1,200 theaters, and I think our opening box office gross was like $10 million for the weekend, which was big. And in fact, that summer, 11 out of 12 weeks from when the movie was released, it was the #1 movie in America. Only one weekend we got knocked out by some National Lampoon movie. I forgot what it was.
And our big concern was that we were going to get clobbered by the Mad Max or the Road Warrior Beyond the Thunderdome.
Right.
I remember, oh man, they were going to, that was going to be it, and we rolled right over them. So we were really excited about that. I know. What's interesting about this movie was I went to a couple theaters to watch it play with the public, and people, when Michael got back and he did that thing with his family, everyone assumed that the movie was over, and some people would start to leave the theater, and then they would come running back in because this movie was still going, because we had so many different endings on this movie that people were trying to second guess the endings, and of course they were always wrong.
Can you explain how you stay in tune with the popular culture? What's going on? Is that awareness important to you, and is it part of your creative process?
The awareness is that it's a constant sort of anxiety and fear because you don't really know why it is, and you don't know when it's going to go away. And you look around you and you see it happening to other filmmakers all over the place, and just the landscape of everything is changing so dramatically. But I just keep asking myself the two questions, which is do I want to go see this movie, and do I think anybody else wants to go see it? Because that's the best I can do, and it's really out of my control.
We find that if you try to second guess the audience too much, you're going to shoot yourself in the head. And there's plenty of movies where you see that somebody in the studio is trying to say, "Oh, this is hot right now. Let's we got to put Britney Spears in the movie, or whoever it is, whoever's hot, or whatever the big thing is has to be in the movie." And it's a bad idea because it's not true to somebody's vision.
Yeah, I remember one studio executive when we were trying to get this movie made, going back to the early days. It was one of my, again, I won't mention his name, but he said, "Look, time travel movies never work. They just don't work. That's what he said.
The Back to the Future trilogy was a huge success, of course, but we're just wondering if there were any time where you had creative differences when you were working together on the films.
We truly respect each other's talent and opinion.
What happens is when we'll have a difference of opinion about something, instead of believing that one of us is right and the other one is wrong, we'll try to figure out I'll say, Bob, what is it about this that is bothering you? And he'll start explaining it so that I can try to get inside of his head and figure it out. And generally what would happen is that we would come up with something brand new that was better than what my original idea was or what his idea was. So that's true collaboration. And you get a synthesis, and instead of 2 + 2 = 4, it equals 8.
And there is something about that I think a movie like Back to the Future, which is a movie that really benefits from the writing team the writers being a team, because the thing that when you have a collaboration like mine and Bob's, whatever that is, because it does work. And another thing that it has is like there's no ego involved. When one of us comes up with a really great idea, the other person says that's a really great idea, and that and that goes right into the script. But why I think it's good for pop movies like this is because we're able to temper each other's own indulgences. So we don't get self-indulgent like you can when you're writing. You don't have somebody there killing your darlings or calling you on it. It gets very self-indulgent, and you just go, this scene is going on forever, and cut this stuff out. So you're making mass entertainment, and so you might as well be collaborating because it's not something that's like a poem where it's supposed to be just your
vision,
your emotional vision.
You're already bringing in actors and technicians and all these other people to help you realize the vision. So it's all filmmaking is collaborative all the way through. So yeah, bring each other into it and bring the audience in that way, because at the end of the day, we want the movie to work for an audience. What's the point if nobody's going to go see it? Or if they go see it and they don't get it, make sure that they get it.
Can you tell us about the music, how you went about choosing it? Not just the score, but also the actual songs. Huey Lewis and the News was such a big part of the movie.
Johnny B. Goode was always in the original script.
Johnny B. Goode there was no second choice. It had to be Johnny B. Goode. And that turned out to be the most expensive piece of music in the movie.
The idea was, we were thinking, look, we got a movie that's got teens in it. We got to have a record on the radio. It was from the beginning. We knew we wanted to have a signature song that we could get on the radio. And Alan said, hey, you got to hear this guy, Huey Lewis, Al Silvestri. And I said, okay. I didn't know, he had the Sports album had just come out. And we called them, and they were very enthusiastic to get involved. And they came in and they wrote a song that wasn't right. And I brought Huey into the editing room, and I showed him the cut scene. And this was like during this insane post-production where I think I want a new drug to it, just to give him an idea when Michael blasts out of the Doc's thing on the skateboard. And Huey said, oh, I get this. You want a major song. We got to do a song in a major key. That was it. He went off, wrote Power of Love, which I remember when Neil Canton called me and he said, I just found out Power of Love is going on. This was like 2 weeks before the movie cut. It's going on the radio, and it's going in heavy rotation. And I said, great. And we had sent all the field people out to all the radio stations and remind them to say, from the movie Back to the Future.
Because the studio always wants the song to be the title of the movie.
Right, the song, yeah.
Huey Lewis said, I can't work that way. I got to just write the song that is going to be right for it. And so And then he decided to write the second song. I think we only asked him to write one.
Yeah,
first.
they wrote the second song, and then we put that in there, and I think it was the only number one single that Huey ever did, or something like that. It was like he had like I don't remember, but it was like some big breakthrough record for these guys, even after the album.
And it got nominated for an Academy Award.
So it was great, but all the DJs were saying, you know, from the movie Back to the Future, it just was one of those things where all the, you know, I guess they call it synergy now, all came together. The plan came together.
Bob Zemeckis, I was just wondering if you could tell us how you feel about the movie looking back at it today.
Other than there being some pretty sloppy stuff in the movie, from a technical standpoint, I was watching that early Remote Heads, and I hadn't seen this movie on the big screen. I don't think I've seen it on the big screen since it came out. And so I'm sitting there and I'm watching, like, in the dance scene, you know, we had this terrible remote head called a hothead, and you could just see it just jerking, and I'm going, oh man. But you know, nowadays all that stuff's perfect. But I don't know if I'd be doing this, you know, comedy with that. There's that kind of broad kind of comedy, maybe. I don't know if I don't know. Maybe. I mean, if the script's right, maybe I will. I don't know.
It was a pretty good movie, actually.
It's pretty good. I mean, I think I don't know if we've grown as screenwriters from this. This is like the best thing we've ever written.
It's a pretty terrific screenplay.
You know.
And we're always flattered that we hear that it's used in classes as like a quintessential example of how you set stuff up and how you pay it off. And all that stuff works. Those are tried and true rules of storytelling, and we made them work. And that's the nice thing of having the writers be the filmmakers. When the director totally gets the script because he wrote it.
And you know, we're still talking about Sid Sheinberg a lot. You know, when the movie came out, he said that screenplay is like a Swiss watch. And you know what? He's right. I mean, there's not a single frame of that movie that isn't you know, doing what they told us we're supposed to do in film school, advance plot or character. Like, not a single frame. It's like really economical, this movie.
Can you describe some of the deleted scenes that were in the movie and were taken out prior to the release?
God, I don't remember.
I know what they are because we pulled them out to put them on the DVD.
What are they?
we had a scene. The Darth Vader scene was a whole lot longer.
Right. Well, that was just shortened.
That was shortened, but
right.
that was like 2 minutes longer. There was a scene where everything was pretty much lifts. There's a scene where Doc Brown in the 50s opens up the suitcase that we see him put in there,
right.
And he's going through all of his personal belongings, and he wants to know what's this thing, and he pulls out this hairdryer, and he's got this fixation on underwear. So he pulls out this pair of underpants and is disappointed that they're cotton and the underwear of the future isn't made out of paper. We had a little scene where, as a stall to get George McFly out before he could get out to the car, the kid in the red hair that cuts in on him at the dance locks him in a phone booth. When he looks at the clock to see what time it is, he decides he better be sure and calls the time and temperature to find out exactly what time it is, and ends up being locked in the phone booth. It just turned out to be a scene that we didn't need.
Yeah. How did he get out, or didn't we show that?
We showed Strickland coming over there and saying, see what happens to slackers, McFly? And we filmed them letting him out, but we didn't ever use it. We just, you'd see him come out and you knew that Strickland must have let him out.
You know, I do remember, this is how dangerous it is. It gets, you know, how you can get so self-destructive. I remember we almost cut the whole Johnny Be Good scene out of the movie. You remember this? And we were in the area, it was 11th hour, and it was because of this thing. It's the only place in the movie where the storyline stops for Michael to do this performance. And I remember I actually had Artie lift it, and I looked at the movie without it, and it worked okay. And then Artie, my editor, and he said, why don't we leave it in for the preview? And I mean, so it was like, see, I mean, it's like, man, these things are scary, what happens. I mean, because you just lose your focus, and you're not, you know, and you're thinking, well, maybe I should make the movie shorter, and it doesn't really advance anything, and it's fun to watch this, but, you know, and so, but then once the audience went crazy, then, you know, so, you know, it's really a shame that we can't preview anymore, because previews are so important, but you just can't, because the movie's reviewed on the internet the next hour, so. It's a work in progress. It's like it's a terrible tool that's been destroyed. It's so important to be able to do that.
One of the end sequences with Doc in the car uses fusion. It is a contemporary concept now, but how did you know about it then?
Fuel cells. Yeah, well, you know, we knew about that. We read about that.
Fusion was something that everybody's been experimenting with, and in fact, I think about 6 or 8 months after the movie came out, it was when those scientists in Utah claimed that they had figured out cold fusion. And that was all over the news for 4 or 5 months until nobody could replicate those experiments, and turned out those guys just didn't know what they were doing. But we actually got a letter from the Defense Department when the movie came out. They wanted to know, what did we know about fusion power? Very scary, kids. Very
This is how
scary.
that's how it works.
The sneak previews went really well, and obviously there was great potential for the movie, but were you still concerned somehow that the movie would maybe lose money and not turn a profit?
It's the studio's money, and the way that we rationalize it is we say, well, the studio has decided that it's worth $20 million to them to make this movie. We're going to realize it as best as we can, but they pushed the button and said, we're going to write this check against this movie and hope that it works. Otherwise, if you drive yourself crazy.
You have better odds if you took your $20 million, went to Las Vegas, and put the $20 million on the come line at the crap table. Your odds are better than making money on a movie. But that's the business we've chosen. So, you know, there's nothing we can do. We have to, you know, we have to do this gambling. You have a little bit more control because you do actually make the movie yourself. But as far as the odds of what movies make money and what movies don't, most movies actually lose money.
Bob Zemeckis, at the time you were developing the screenplay, your name was attached to the project as director. Was that a plus in getting the project made?
Before I made Romancing the Stone, it was a hindrance, and after I made Romancing the Stone, it was a help.
But the fact is, nobody
But
ever...
the script was the same.
The script was the same, but nobody ever read the script and said, gee, we'd like to give this script to this other director to make, because nobody liked the script. You know, all these rejection letters that Bob has in his archives, we got, whether it's 42 or 44 of them from studios and different producers. It wasn't like anybody was calling us up and saying, hey, I'll do anything to make that script Back to the Future. There wasn't anybody that was interested. So there was no, that wasn't a decision that we ever had to wrestle with. Bob was going to direct the movie, you know, end of conversation.
And you know, I was getting, before Romancing the Stone, I was getting the worst possible reputation, which is, oh yeah, his movies are good, but you know, they don't make any money. And man, that was the kiss of death.
Bob Zemeckis, you mentioned earlier that you noticed a few flaws in the movie, things that the average viewer would not catch. What is your take on that?
Well, that's just, you know, that's just me seeing all the little flaws and things. I mean, you know, I think that's just the way it is. I mean, I look at movies that I love and I think they're perfect, and I talk to the filmmakers and they don't know what I'm talking about, you know, so. It's
always the same in all the arts. You know, a painter will look at his painting and he'll look at that tree limb that he never got right. That's the only thing he'll focus on when, you know, everybody else is looking at the whole canvas, say, gee, what a great painting. So I don't think you'll ever find a director that will say that I made the perfect movie. And if they do say that, the movie's probably a complete piece of junk.
At the end of Back to the Future, Marty returns to a new and improved 1985. Was it always written that way?
Yeah, it was 1985. That was, you know, that you gotta look at that ending in historical context. It's a very 80s ending.
No, but the fact that that things changed for the better as a result of his actions was always something that, it's a story of a kid who teaches his father how to be a man.
Yes, but things changed for the better. They were, you know, material things. there were possessions. He had a truck. You know, his father had a BMW.
Yeah, but his father's a successful author.
Yeah,
Bob,
but that's
come
all.
on.
But I mean, but it was the '80s. You know, it's interesting. There were a couple of reviews that came out of Europe that keyed in on sort of the blatant kind of the idea that, wait a minute, how can these filmmakers equate this kind of happiness with material possessions? But not a single critic that I remember talked about it in America.
There's quite a bit of product placement in the movie. Was this supposed to be a direct slam against the materialistic attitude that we had in the 1980s?
In terms of creating the image of the past, one of the ways that you create the past is through brand names. And we made a conscious effort to find products that had a different logo in the past so that we could use those. I mean, it used to be in the 60s and the 70s, they'd make a movie and a car would pull into a gas station and there would be like no name on the gas station. And we would say, well, that's ridiculous. It has to be, somebody owns that gas station. It's some brand of gasoline. Put the brand in there, that makes it real. So we actually, there was a product placement department at the studio that had just gotten started, and they were trying to cram all kinds of stuff at us, but we would nix anything that really didn't work too well. Shell gasoline, for example, would have paid more for a placement than Texaco did, but Shell didn't change their logo. So Texaco was the perfect gas station because how different a Texaco station looked in the 50s compared to the 80s. The same with Pepsi versus Coke. Coke bottle in the 50s and a Coke bottle in the 80s were the same, but a Pepsi logo was completely different.
When we talk about the sequels, we'll tell you all the product placement horror stories, but because nobody really cares about product placement until they know that the movie's going to be a hit, and so that's one of the problems with sequels.
There's one product placement story I got to tell you. The product placement department hired this real sleazy guy. A lot of these product placement guys are sleazy because that's what they do. They try to figure out how to graft these corporations and make these ridiculous promises. So he made this deal with the California Raisin Board that Back to the Future was going to do for raisins what E.T. did for Reese's Pieces. And they come to me with this proposal to put raisins in the movie. And I'm saying, what brand? Sun-made raisins? No, just raisins. Can't you have a bowl of raisins at the dance? I'm going, what do you mean a bowl of raisins looks like a bowl of dirt? How is that going to photograph? If we can't put a brand name somewhere, and they had taken $50,000 from the California Raisin Board for this placement that wasn't going to happen in the movie. Finally, what we gave him was the bum on the bench in 1985 when the DeLorean comes back at the end. It says California Raisins on that bus bench. That was what came out of that deal. And when the California Raisin Board saw it, they were livid because I didn't realize at the time they'd already actually paid the money. And they told the studio they were going to sue them, and the lawyer at the studio called me into her office and asked me about it. I said, well, you better settle the lawsuit and give them back their money because I'd be happy to be a witness for them because of the way that they just tried to, force this on us, and we weren't going to do it. So the California Raisin Board ended up not paying for that exposure.
And the lesson I learned on this in the subsequent, sequels was I never do product placement ever anymore. The only real way to do product is to get permission and then to get cooperation. So if you're going to do Texaco and they give you a bunch of signs and uniforms and stuff that you don't have to make, that's the only way. But I never take money anymore because it's like you got another creative person.
You got another producer that's
you got another
saying,
producer.
what am I getting from my money?
And it's never
here?
worth it. It's just never worth it. So product placement just isn't worth it.
You kind of touched about it throughout this whole discussion, but I'm just wondering if you could tell us what was your favorite part of making this film?
You know what? My favorite part of making this film was writing it. I mean, the actual making of the movie, I don't remember any good times. I don't remember a single. I mean, I guess seeing the movie work when it was finally put up on the screen, that was a thrill. But the actual shooting of the movie was just, survival, and it was cold, and it was. I remember just never having enough sleep, always being half asleep. just never, I was the most unhealthy I ever was when I made this movie. I was the fattest and the most out of shape and sick that I ever was making this movie. So I guess the writing and the finishing were the favorite parts, and the actual shooting was just survival.
I think the best moment that I had on the set was Michael J. Fox's first day, and when he walked in front of the camera and he started doing the scene, and I just felt, thank God, that's Marty McFly. It's going to work now. It's going to work.
Kind of along the same lines about your expectations with the actors, you said you were very happy with the performances, but would you say that they exceeded your expectations?
Yeah, they're brilliant. I mean, this is one of those movies where everybody just, is on the same page. Once Michael came into the movie, it was like everything just gelled together, and everybody just got the tone of what the humor of this movie should be. And
now, all the performances around Michael were better. I mean, Leo was fine with Eric Stoltz, and Chris was fine, but when Michael J. Fox was working with him, it just supercharged it. It just went into the stratosphere. So if you talk to actors, they'll talk about give and take and how important it is to have to be playing a scene with somebody that gives back something for them to work from, and that was always what was happening.
I would say, honestly, they're better than I thought they could ever be. I've been fortunate to work with so many great actors that it's always better than I ever imagined. It really is. It really, truly is.
How much control did you have over the final cut?
That's the final cut.
Yeah, I've never had any of these final cut problems. I mean, never ever once in my entire career have I ever had to have a struggle with over the cut of the picture. Now, of course, I contractually have final cut in everything that I do, but even in the early days, I didn't have final cut, but nobody wanted to tamper with it. I really believe that most studio executives don't want to do the filmmaker's work. They really, and it becomes more of a personality clash than it has anything to do with the movie when you have these issues about final cut. I've never had anyone ever try to take the movie away, and on any movie I've ever made.
Are you making any changes to the movie for the DVD, taking out, for example, the wires that you mentioned, the ones we see in the clock tower scene?
Nope.
No.
I hate that. I don't think you should ever do that. I mean, that's like colorizing a movie, a black and white movie. It is what it is.
Warts and all.
I mean, yeah, I don't get this. Adding scenes back in and recutting the movie. I don't get that at all. I don't. It should be the way it was in time. At that moment in time, this is the movie and this is the way it was, and that I think is what it's supposed to be.
For those of you that have only seen the movie on home video, on the video it says "to be continued" at the end. You didn't see that here. That was never on the theatrical release. It won't be on the DVD. We only put that on the video as a way of telling the world that there was going to be a sequel. So if anybody says, "Well, that's different," no, that's the film that you saw was a new print made from the original elements. It's been remastered in high def, and it looks absolutely great. I supervise the video transfer, but it's the movie that you just saw.
Is the trailer for 3 going to be on the end of 2?
Yes.
Oh.
And the only thing that's different about that is that at the end of that trailer it said originally coming summer 1990, and now it doesn't say coming summer 1990.
If you could travel in time, where would you go?
It depends. If I could come back, I would go to the future. I mean, I'd go to the past, but if I could only go one way, I'd go to the future.
And Bob Gale, where would you go?
Maybe I'd go back and see what my parents were like in high school. That would certainly be about the most interesting thing I can think of.
Can you tell us who were some of your major influences when you were making this movie? Any other writers, directors that really inspired you?
The classic American directors. I mean, I think that the main influences on this movie are definitely, Frank Capra and Billy Wilder. Throw a little John Ford in there when you start getting into the sequels, I guess, But I'd say it's probably like a Billy Wilder movie more than anything, maybe. But I mean, they're the filmmakers that we love, you know, the classic American filmmakers.
I think we're going to end on that note. Robert Zemeckis, Bob Gale, thank you so much for your time. This was really, truly an amazing experience. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.